A lonely rancher found a pregnant Apache girl in the snow and gave her shelter with his last firewood. The bitter January wind howled across the New Mexico territory, carrying snow that stung like needles against exposed skin. Thomas Harrington stood at the window of his modest ranch house, watching as darkness fell over the barren landscape. At 52, the lines on his weathered face told the story of a man who had spent most of his life battling the elements. 3 years a widower now, the isolation of winter on the frontier had never felt more absolute. His ranch, once a promising venture, had dwindled to a small herd of cattle and 2 horses. The drought last summer had been particularly brutal, forcing him to sell half his livestock. Tonight's blizzard was unseasonably fierce, even for 1887. Thomas added another log to the fireplace, one of his last, and listened to the wind's mournful cry. "Just you and me again tonight, old girl," he muttered to his border collie, Sadie, who lay curled by the hearth. The dog's ears perked up momentarily before settling back into her comfortable position. Thomas was about to retire for the night when Sadie suddenly bolted upright, her body tense. A low growl emanated from her throat. "What is it, girl?" Thomas reached for his rifle, always kept loaded by the door. The dog barked once, then twice, her eyes fixed on the front entrance. Thomas approached cautiously, straining to hear anything beyond the howling wind. Then, almost imperceptible, came a sound, a faint knocking. Rifle at the ready, Thomas cracked open the door. The wind immediately forced it wider, bringing with it a flurry of snow and revealing a figure huddled on his porch. It was a young woman, no more than 20, wrapped in a tattered blanket. Her long black hair was matted with ice, her copper skin alarmingly pale from the cold. Her eyes, dark and frightened, met his briefly before she collapsed forward. Thomas caught her before she hit the ground, his rifle clattering beside them. As he lifted her, he realized 2 things simultaneously. She was Apache, and she was heavily pregnant. "Good Lord," he whispered, carrying her inside and kicking the door shut behind them. He placed her gently on his bed, noticing how her hands instinctively cradled her swollen belly even in unconsciousness. Sadie approached cautiously, sniffing at the stranger. "It's all right, girl," Thomas reassured the dog, though he wasn't entirely convinced himself. Relations between settlers and Apaches remained tense, despite most tribes being confined to reservations now. This young woman had clearly traveled far in dangerous conditions. But why? And how had she ended up at his isolated ranch? As Thomas stoked the fire with another precious log, he watched the young woman's breathing, shallow but steady. Outside, the blizzard intensified, sealing them together in this unexpected situation. Whatever her story, she wouldn't be leaving anytime soon. He dampened a cloth with melted snow and began to gently wipe the ice from her face. As he did, her eyes fluttered open, wide with fear. "You're safe," Thomas said softly, raising his empty hands to show he meant no harm. "I won't hurt you." She looked around frantically, her breathing quickening. "Baby," she whispered, her English broken but understandable. "My baby comes." Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He was alone on a ranch in the middle of a blizzard with a pregnant Apache woman who might be about to give birth. He had delivered calves and foals, but never a human child. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Nilchi," she replied, wincing as she shifted on the bed. "It means wind." Thomas nodded. "I'm Thomas. You're safe here, Nilchi." As another contraction visibly gripped her, Thomas realized that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. The blizzard had brought more than just snow to his door tonight. If you want to discover what happens next in this unexpected encounter during the bitter winter of 1887, subscribe to our channel now. Will Thomas be able to help Nilchi through childbirth? What dangers drove a pregnant Apache woman to seek refuge with a stranger? Click that subscribe button to make sure you don't miss the next chapter of this gripping frontier tale. By midnight, The blizzard had reached its full fury. The wind screamed around the corners of the ranch house, finding every crack and crevice, while snow piled against the walls. Inside, the modest home had become a sanctuary of warmth and mounting tension. Nilchi's labor had progressed rapidly. Thomas had positioned her near the fireplace, sacrificing more of his dwindling firewood supply to keep the room warm. He'd gathered clean linens, boiled water, and tried to remember everything his late wife, Martha, had once told him about midwifery. "Breathe slow," Thomas instructed, demonstrating deep breaths. Nilchi attempted to mimic him, but another contraction seized her, causing her to cry out. Afraid," she admitted between pained gasps. "My people." "Not here," Thomas nodded, understanding the gravity of her isolation. "I know, but you're strong, and I'm right here." In the flickering firelight, he noticed a necklace around her neck, a small leather pouch on a rawhide string. Nilchi caught his gaze and touched it briefly. "Medicine, protection for baby." Thomas nodded respectfully. "It's working. You both made it here through the storm." As the night deepened, Nilchi's contractions came faster. Thomas positioned himself at the foot of his makeshift birthing bed, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. "I see the head," he announced, his voice steadier than his hands. "Next, pain. You push hard." Nilchi gathered her strength, gripping the blankets beneath her. When the next contraction came, she bore down with surprising force, her face contorted with effort. "Good!" Thomas encouraged. Again. 3 more pushes brought the baby's head fully into view, then the shoulders. With a final, tremendous effort from Nilchi, the child slipped into Thomas's waiting hands. A tiny girl, her skin still purple from the journey. For one terrible moment, the baby didn't move or cry. Thomas quickly wiped her face and mouth, then gently rubbed her back. Suddenly, she gasped and let out a wail that seemed impossibly loud for such a small being. "She's perfect," Thomas said, his voice breaking as he wrapped the infant in a clean shirt and placed her on Nilchi's chest. "You have a daughter." Nilchi's exhausted face transformed with wonder as she cradled her child. "Nadastsozi," she whispered, touching the baby's cheek. "Little one who fought." Thomas busied himself with the afterbirth and cleaning up, giving mother and daughter a moment of privacy. When he returned with some heated broth, he found Nilchi studying her baby's features with an intensity that spoke of both love and worry. "Her father?" Thomas ventured cautiously. Nilchi's expression darkened. "Soldier, not good man." She looked up at Thomas, her eyes filled with determination. "I run from reservation. No safe there for us." Thomas understood immediately. Mixed-race children faced cruelty from both worlds. On the reservation, the baby might be an outcast. Among white settlers, she would face different but equally harmful prejudices. "You rest now," Thomas said, helping Nilchi sip the broth. "You're both safe tonight." As dawn approached, the storm finally began to ease. Thomas sat in his chair, watching mother and child sleep. The baby had his late wife's hairbrush handle clutched in her tiny fist, the first toy Thomas could find to soothe her fussing. In the grey morning light, Thomas confronted the reality of his situation. His food supplies were limited, his firewood nearly gone. The nearest town was a 2-day ride in good weather, and now he had 2 more lives depending on him, an Apache woman fleeing the reservation and her newborn daughter. The law would say he should report them. His neighbors would expect him to turn them away once the weather cleared. But as he watched them sleep, Thomas knew he could do neither. Outside, the first rays of sunlight glinted off the snow-covered landscape, transforming it into a sea of diamonds. Despite everything, it was beautiful, like the new life that had come into the world during the darkest hours of the night. A week passed, then 2. February arrived with milder weather, melting some of the snow but bringing its own challenges. Thomas's supplies continued to dwindle, and Nilchi, though recovering remarkably well, remained too weak for any journey. The baby, whom Thomas had taken to calling Little Fighter in English, was thriving under their combined care. Their routine had settled into something almost comfortable. Nilchi, raised in Apache traditions, proved resourceful even in her weakened state. She showed Thomas how to make a cradle board for the baby from materials around the ranch, and taught him words in her language. In return, he helped improve her English and shared stories of his life before the ranch, his childhood in Pennsylvania, his marriage to Martha, their dreams of building something lasting in the territory. "Why no children for you?" Nilchi asked one evening as they sat by the fire, the baby sleeping between them. Thomas stared into the flames. "Martha and I tried. For years, we tried. Then the fever took her before we could," Nilchi nodded, understanding loss without needing more explanation. "She watches you help us. She is proud." The simple statement brought unexpected comfort to Thomas. They sat in companionable silence until Nilchi spoke again. "Man will come looking soon." "For you?" Thomas asked, instantly alert. "Agent from reservation. Soldiers." Her voice remained steady, but fear flickered in her eyes. "They count us like cattle. They know I gone." Thomas had been expecting this conversation. "What will you do when spring comes?" "Go north," she replied without hesitation. "Find my mother's people in mountains. Live free." It was a dangerous plan, perhaps impossible for a young woman traveling alone with an infant. But Thomas understood the desire for freedom that drove her. "I can help you get started," he offered. "Supplies, a horse when you're strong enough." Nilchi studied him, her dark eyes penetrating. "Why you help Apache woman? Most white men hate us." Thomas considered his answer carefully. "I don't see an Apache woman. I see a mother protecting her child." He paused. "And maybe I was tired of being alone." Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Thomas was on his feet instantly, peering out the window. "Riders," he said grimly. "3 of them." He grabbed his rifle. "Stay inside with the baby." He stepped onto the porch just as the riders approached. 2 men in cavalry uniforms and a third in civilian clothes. The civilian, a thin man with a neatly trimmed beard, urged his horse forward. "Mr. Harrington," he called. "I'm James Wilson, Indian agent from the San Carlos Reservation." Thomas nodded but kept his rifle visible. "What brings you out this way, Mr. Wilson?" "We're searching for a young Apache woman who fled the reservation about a month ago, pregnant. Name of Nilchi." Wilson's eyes scanned the property. Heavy snow might have driven her to seek shelter. "Seen anyone fitting that description?" Thomas's heart pounded, but his face remained impassive. "Haven't seen anyone in weeks. Blizzard had me snowed in until a few days ago." Wilson exchanged glances with the soldiers. "Mind if we take a look around? She's a ward of the government. It's our responsibility to return her to the reservation." "For her own protection, of course," Thomas replied, not bothering to hide his sarcasm. Wilson's expression hardened. "These are dangerous times, Mr. Harrington. A woman like that, alone out here, she wouldn't last long." "And whose fault is that?" Thomas countered, his grip tightening on his rifle. "From what I hear, conditions on that reservation aren't exactly ideal." One of the soldiers shifted impatiently. "Sir, we have orders." "And I have rights," Thomas interrupted. "This is my property. Unless you have a warrant, you're not searching anything." Wilson studied Thomas for a long moment. "We'll be back, Mr. Harrington, with proper documentation." He tipped his hat with mock courtesy. "Good day to you." Thomas watched them ride away, tension knotting his shoulders. When he returned inside, he found Nilchi standing in the shadows, the baby clutched tightly to her chest. "They will return," she said quietly. Thomas nodded, setting his rifle aside. "Yes, which means we don't have much time." That night, as Nilchi slept with the baby beside her, Thomas sat at his table drawing a rough map by lamplight. He marked the safest routes north, places to find water, settlements to avoid. It wouldn't be easy, but it might give them a chance. What he didn't mark, couldn't bring himself to decide yet, was whether he would be making the journey with them. The following days passed in a flurry of preparation. Thomas knew the Indian agent would return, possibly with reinforcements and certainly with authorization to search his property. They had a week at most before Nilchi and the baby would need to leave, with or without him. Thomas rode to a neighboring ranch under the pretense of trading for supplies. The Petersons were good people who kept to themselves, and Mrs. Peterson didn't ask questions when Thomas requested extra cornmeal, dried meat, and baby clothes. She simply gathered the items, accepted his trade of 2 fine saddles, and sent him on his way with a knowing look that made him wonder how much she had guessed. Meanwhile, Nilchi grew stronger daily. She began helping around the ranch, mending clothes and preparing meals that stretched their limited supplies. In the evenings, she sang softly to her daughter in Apache, songs that Thomas found hauntingly beautiful, even without understanding the words. "What will you name her?" Thomas asked one night as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the horizon in shades of orange and purple. The baby was nearly a month old now, her features becoming more distinct each day. Nilchi considered the question. "Among my people, naming is important. Sometimes we wait, watch child grow to see who they are." She looked down at her daughter. "But I think, Nada Hustzan, what does it mean?" "Earth," Nilchi replied. "Good because she is new beginning, like world after winter." Thomas smiled. "It's a good name. Strong." Nilchi nodded, then turned to face him directly. "Thomas, you come with us." The question hung in the air between them. Thomas had been avoiding this decision, torn between his sense of responsibility to this woman and child who had come into his life so unexpectedly, and his attachment to the land he had worked for 15 years. "I don't know," he admitted. "This ranch was Martha's dream as much as mine. Leaving feels like—" He trailed off, unable to articulate the complex emotions, "like betrayal." Nilchi finished for him. "I understand. My people feel same about our lands." They sat in silence as darkness fell, each lost in thought. Finally, Thomas spoke. "If I stay, I'll tell them you left weeks ago. Headed south toward Mexico. It might buy you time." Nilchi reached out hesitantly and placed her hand on his. "Thank you for everything." The moment was interrupted by Sadie's sudden barking. Thomas was on his feet instantly, scanning the darkness. The dog stood at attention, facing the direction of the main road. "Someone's coming," Thomas whispered. "Get inside." He grabbed his rifle and positioned himself on the porch, straining to see through the darkness. The sound of a single horse approaching reached his ears. "Who's there?" he called out. "Show yourself." "It's Peterson," a voice replied. "Don't shoot, Harrington." Thomas lowered his rifle slightly as Jacob Peterson, his neighbor's eldest son, emerged from the shadows. The young man was breathing hard, his horse lathered from a fast ride. "Mr. Harrington, you need to listen," Jacob said urgently. "Wilson and those soldiers were at our place asking questions. Pa sent them off, but not before we heard them talking. They're coming back here tomorrow at dawn with more men. They know you've got an Apache woman here." Thomas felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "How?" "Someone saw smoke from your chimney during the worst of the blizzard. Said it was too much for just one person trying to keep warm." Jacob glanced nervously at the house. "Pa said to tell you they'll be here at first light, all official-like, with papers." Thomas nodded grimly. "Thank your father for me, Jacob." After the young man departed, Thomas returned inside to find Nilchi already packing the few belongings they had gathered for her journey. "You heard?" She nodded without looking up. "We leave tonight." Thomas watched her methodical movements, her calm efficiency even in crisis. In just a month, this woman had shown more courage and determination than many displayed in a lifetime. "I'm coming with you," he said suddenly, surprising himself as much as her. Nilchi paused, looking up at him. "Your home is just a place," Thomas finished. "I can build another." He glanced around the cabin that had been his home for so many years. "There's nothing keeping me here anymore." Within an hour, they had loaded Thomas's strongest horse with supplies and prepared a second for Nilchi and the baby. Thomas took only what couldn't be replaced: Martha's hairbrush that the baby had grown attached to, a locket with his wife's portrait, and a small box of seeds they had brought from Pennsylvania years ago. As midnight approached, they stood ready to depart. Thomas took one last look at the ranch, the house he had built with his own hands, the barn where he had spent countless hours, the small garden plot where Martha had grown flowers every summer. "Are you certain?" Nilchi asked softly. Thomas nodded, turning away from his past and toward the uncertain future before them. "Let's go." Under the cover of darkness, they rode north, away from the life Thomas had known, and toward whatever lay ahead for this unlikely family, brought together by a winter storm. Spring arrived in full glory as Thomas, Nilchi, and little Nadahuzan, Earth, reached the foothills of the mountains in Wyoming territory. Their journey had been arduous, fraught with dangers both natural and man-made. They had traveled mostly by night, avoiding settlements and patrols, living off the land when supplies ran low. Thomas had grown leaner, his beard longer, his skin darkened by sun and wind. Nilchi had taught him how to move quietly through forests, how to find water in seemingly barren landscapes, how to read the night sky for navigation. In return, he had shared his knowledge of horses and cattle, of building shelters that could withstand harsh weather, of trading with settlers when necessary without arousing suspicion. The baby had thrived despite the difficult conditions, growing stronger each day. Her eyes, dark and alert, took in the changing world around her with seeming fascination. At 3 months old, she had already experienced more of the country than most would in a lifetime. "We close now," Nilchi announced one morning, as they crested a ridge overlooking a lush valley. "My mother's cousin lived in these mountains with others who escaped reservation." Thomas surveyed the landscape, appreciating its natural defenses, steep approaches, dense forest cover, plentiful water from mountain streams. "Good place to start over," he agreed. They made camp that night beside a clear stream, allowing themselves the luxury of a small fire. As Earth slept peacefully in her cradleboard, Thomas and Nilchi sat side by side, watching the flames. "What will your people think of me?" Thomas asked quietly, giving voice to a concern that had grown as they neared their destination. Nilchi considered his question. "Some will not trust at first. White man who helps Apache is unusual." She smiled slightly. "But they will see your heart." "Same as I did." "And what did you see?" Thomas asked, suddenly curious about how this remarkable woman perceived him. "Man who lost much but still gives, man who respects others, ways." She turned to face him directly. "Man who learns new path when old one ends." Thomas felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Over the months of their journey, his feelings for Nilchi had evolved from protective concern to deep respect, and something more, something he hadn't dared name even to himself. "I never expected this," he admitted. "When you showed up at my door that night, I thought I was just helping someone in need. I never imagined—" "New family?" Nilchi offered. Thomas nodded, emotion making it difficult to speak. "Yes, a new family." The next morning, as they prepared to make the final leg of their journey, Thomas noticed Nilchi standing apart, looking toward the mountains with an expression of both longing and apprehension. "What is it?" he asked, joining her. "I left as girl," she said softly. "Return as mother, with white man." She touched the medicine pouch at her neck. "Path changes in ways we cannot see ahead." Thomas understood her concern. "If they don't accept me, I'll find a place nearby, close enough to help if you need me, far enough to respect their boundaries." Nilchi turned to him, her eyes reflecting the morning sun. "No, we stay together now, all three." She took his weathered hand in hers. "You are family." By midday, they encountered the first signs of human presence, subtle markers in the landscape that Thomas would have missed months ago, but now recognized as boundary indicators. Nilchi exchanged calls with unseen watchers in the forest, her voice rising and falling in a language Thomas had come to appreciate, but still couldn't understand. Eventually, 2 men emerged from the trees, bows ready but not aimed. They spoke rapidly with Nilchi, their eyes constantly darting to Thomas and the baby. After a tense moment, One of the men nodded and gestured for them to follow. "They take us to village," Nilchi explained. "My mother's cousin Nantai is still alive. He is respected elder now." The settlement was well hidden in a sheltered valley, a collection of traditional wickiups alongside more permanent wooden structures. As they entered, people emerged to watch them pass, their expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. An elderly man stepped forward from the gathering crowd. His face was deeply lined, his hair white, but his posture remained straight and proud. Nilchi immediately dismounted and approached him with respect, speaking softly in Apache. The old man listened, his eyes moving from Nilchi to Thomas to the baby. After what seemed like an eternity, the elder approached Thomas, who had remained on his horse, unsure of the protocol. Thomas dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "I am Nantai," the old man said in surprisingly clear English. "Nilchi says you saved her and the child, that you left your home to help them reach us." Thomas nodded. "They saved me too, in their way." Nantai studied him for a long moment. "Many whites have made promises to Apache. Most break them. I'm not here to make promises," Thomas replied honestly, "just to find a place where we can live in peace." The elder's weathered face revealed nothing of his thoughts. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "Peace is good. Odd to find, but good." He gestured toward the village. "Come, tonight we feast for Nilchi's return and her daughter's arrival among us." That evening, as the community gathered around fires to share food and stories, Thomas sat beside Nilchi, the baby sleeping contentedly between them. He watched as she reconnected with her people, her face animated in a way he had rarely seen during their journey. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly when she turned back to him. Nilchi looked around at the village, then down at her daughter, and finally at Thomas. "Yes," she said simply. "This is right place for us." Later, as the celebration continued around them, Nantai approached and sat beside Thomas. "Harrington," the elder said thoughtfully. "You a rancher?" Thomas nodded. "Yes. Cattle mostly. Some horses. We have need of such skills," Nantai remarked, gesturing toward a meadow visible in the distance. "A good grazing land, but we know little of raising herds." Thomas understood the offer being extended. "I'd be happy to help." Nantai nodded, satisfied. "Good. Tomorrow we show you where you and Nilchi can build home." He glanced at the baby. "Earth will need strong walls when winter returns." As the elder moved away to speak with others, Thomas felt a profound sense of acceptance wash over him. He looked up at the star-filled sky, thinking of how far they had come, not just in miles, but in understanding. Beside him, Nilchi gently stroked her daughter's cheek. "She sleeps well here," she observed. "She knows she is home." Thomas reached out hesitantly, his hand finding Nilchi's. "We all are." In the dancing firelight, surrounded by a community that had cautiously welcomed them, Thomas reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. A blizzard, a desperate knock at his door, a child born in the depths of winter, and now a new life beginning in spring. The journey ahead would have its challenges. There would be cultural differences to navigate, prejudices to overcome, practical obstacles to surmount. But as Thomas watched Earth sleeping peacefully, her tiny hand curled around her mother's finger, he knew with certainty that the decision he had made that night to leave everything behind had been the right one. Some families were formed by blood, others by circumstance. Theirs had been forged in a winter storm and strengthened through a season of change. Whatever came next, they would face it together.